All right, so picking up our study of the book of Daniel. And last week we introduced, as we went into chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar's image. And no, you don't have the artwork of the image up here today, but you have, I guess it's called a graphic. I don't know what you would really call it, but this is pivotal for what that image called for and for some applications for us in our lesson today. And you remember in the first several verses of chapter 3 in Daniel that the king summoned all of his governmental leadership across the empire to come to what is, it's not sure exactly where, but most of the archaeologists say it was probably an area about 16 miles south of the city of Babylon. And there he unveiled an image, and we're not sure whether it was an image of him or an image of his God, which in that day, you know, to worship one, you accepted the other. So it was, kind of a six of one, half dozen of the other type deal, whoever it was that was in the image. And the herald proclaimed that when you hear the sound of the music and all of these different things, you are to fall down and worship. And we look at these three aspects of this scene. You have an image, or you have a focused objective. And then you have sensory social stimulus. In this case, you have the flute and the harp and all of this. You have the grandeur of a 90-foot tall, either solid gold or gold overlay image. You have the power and the pomp of the king. You have all of that social stimulus of everybody doing the same thing. And just in case you decided not to, there was a threat that there was verse 6 tells us, whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So these three aspects, all three of those pointed toward this one thing: fall down and worship, a physical act to prove that you were believing and committed to what Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, what's important to us in our discussion is that this has always been the pattern. This is the pattern Satan has used over and over again. He used it in the Garden of Eden with Eve. There in the garden, he said, he posed a deception. Did God say you couldn't eat of everything? She said, no, we're not supposed to even touch the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God didn't say that. He posed a deception. He had a focused objective. He used sensory stimulus. If you eat of it, you will be like God. What a powerful stimulus. You will be God. You will be just like him. And if you don't, well, you're being deceived. Remember, he told Eve. Did not God say, God didn't really say that. He didn't really mean that. So there was a threat that you're going to be stupid if you don't follow me. So what did she do? And Adam do? They ate it. Physical act to prove. And this is, this has always been the way Satan has acted. When Jesus was tempted, there in Luke's Gospel, chapter 4, if we look at all four of the temptations of Christ by Satan, they all involved some physical action. Throw yourself off the pinnacle of the temple. God will bear you up. Turn this stone into bread. The only one that really didn't declare a physical action was when he showed him all the glory of the kingdoms of the world. And he says, all this is mine to give, and I will give it to you if you fall down and worship, or if you will worship me. He didn't say fall down, but if you will worship me. But The word for worship in Luke chapter 4 is a Greek word which means to kiss towards. In other words, to do obeisance, to do reverence. In other words, fall down and prove that you're going to worship me. So, this is what Satan uses. And he uses these elements to get anyone to try to follow him. Something that, focused objective, he wants us to follow him always. To not follow Jesus Christ, not follow the word, but follow him. The stimulus could be drugs, could be sex, could be money, could be power, could be glory. Anything that will get us to begin to agree to do this. And the threat is always there that, well, if you don't, you're going to be different. If you don't, there's something wrong with you if you don't do this. So, James tells us in James chapter 1, verses 13 to 15, that desire, once it becomes conceived, gives birth to sin. The same process leading to the physical action, whatever it might be, but a physical action that proves you are believing all that Satan has thrown up at you in whatever form it might be. Now, all this prefigures the ultimate scene of idolatry in Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 through 17. And it's in that passage where the second beast arises, and he produces all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders. And every sort of evil, he deceives those who are perishing. And that's from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. Now, the word for worship in Revelation chapter 13 is the same word that Satan used on Jesus. If you will worship me, if you will do obeisance, if you will do reverence, if you will do this, or, if you'll kiss the ring, you put it in a modern format. Worship isn't a mental activity alone. By nature, worship demands a physical action that demonstrates the commitment of the mind and the emotions. The Old Testament law had this. You followed the law, you obeyed it, you followed and you carried out the sacrifices, which proved your belief in what God had given on Mount Sinai. Christianity demands demonstration. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 tells us that, we are to deny ourselves, take up the cross, and follow him. That's a physical action. That's not just a mental state. And it's important for us to realize, because someone can say, oh, I'm a Christian, I believe in God, I believe in all that church stuff, and then live in a way that is totally opposite of that. You don't worship just in mind. This is why Satan follows this same route. He's copying what God asks of us. And it's interesting when we think about, Sherry brought this up last week. We were talking after class about the deceptions and how, is it possible for us to be deceived into taking the mark? With all the things they have now, they have the injection of the little chips and so forth and so on. No. Satan wants a physical act to prove. He's not going to slip the mark of the beast on you. And if you think about it, Revelation chapter 13, verse 16, the Greek word, which is in King James, is causeth. In the New International Version is the word forced. It carries the idea, that Greek word carries the idea to make one do a thing. It's an action. And in this case, to receive the mark. In other words, a physical action to demonstrate your inner allegiance to Antichrist. Now, we can be deceived into, accepting a lot. People talked about the credit card when it first came out as being the mark of the beast. At least that's what I heard. And, we went on and accepted that. It wasn't the mark of the beast. Carried on to today, people are being injected with these little capsules of things or so forth to be able to, has all your medical history and has all the valuable good things about you that will simplify your life and simplify the way you do things. And we're being educated to accept that. Is that the mark? No. Is that all of a sudden going to say, nah, you got the mark, you just thought you would get it? No. Satan's not going to do that. He's going to force you to worship him. He's going to make you worship him. And the threat, if you don't take the mark, you don't buy, you don't sell. You become a refugee. You become a vagabond, essentially.
And that's why they're going to do away with cash and all that.
Yeah.
They're making it to where you
The cashless society. Yeah. I read a book, 2-3 years ago, by a gentleman who is an economist, and he made the statement then that the government was working it so that with a few phone calls, they could shut down the entire monetary system. With just a few phone calls. How can you do that? By having control. If you have a cashless society, all they got to do is send out that little, punch the button. You ain't getting a dime out of the ATM. You ain't getting anything out of the bank.
They just opened up right beside us where I'm at. We call it bit thing they trade with.
Bitcoin?
They got a Bitcoin. You can buy a Bitcoin. It's like a 30-second one for $200 and some odd dollars. So I just want to know what it was. It's $12,000 some odd dollars now for a Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's
And you
way.
go right there. You can trade at the convenience store. Just right beside the ATM machine.
So if they keep printing money, we'll be okay.
No, that's called inflation. That's called inflation. Yeah. Germany, after World War I, they had to have a whole wheelbarrow full of their marks just to get a loaf of bread, So, just printing money is not going to solve the problem either. And I heard someone talking the other day that the secret to be able to survive all of this is buying physically gold and silver. Except there's a little problem with that. One, the fact that the government taxes it by 20% when you buy it, taxes it 20% again when you sell it. So it's 40% of that money is going to be, shuffled away, its value. Where are you going to spend it? How are you going to spend it? You can't eat it. You could have $1 million worth of gold, but if you ain't got nowhere to spend it, it really doesn't do you any good. All that, wonderful bleakness to look at the power of the threat that Satan is looking to create in the world. And this is what he's going to use in the tribulation period. That second part of the 3.5 years is when an image is going to be able to talk, is going to be able to, all the world with its ability to speak. Now, whether it would be something like a Watson in a human form, I don't know. To me, probably, but
They got them robots talking all the time.
yeah, well, and getting it to the place where you can't tell the difference, supposedly, between that and a human being. The sensory social stimulus of all the world is worshiping, counterfeit, miracles, signs, wonders, social stimulus, all the world to worship. The world will say, who is able to make war against the beast? Ever how he presents himself will be in such a manner is that you'll have, Nebuchadnezzar did here won't be nothing compared to what we'll see here.
And discernment's gonna be really, I mean,
Yeah.
discerning between good and evil. I mean,
And the threat of that with Mark, how will we know you worship me? The Antichrist will say.
will we not?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Probably not, but maybe.
That's the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, it's a benefit of the doubt there. I hope I am gone. You know, I hope I am gone, but
I told you I was gonna grab it.
for, yeah. For those of you that will be left, you need to remember this. You know what I'm saying? That how you can tell is what all of this is leading you to. Now, we can have a focused objective in a church service to worship Jesus Christ. We can have social stimulus. We can have the songs. And the ensemble sounds wonderful every time they sing. Hats off. I love to hear y'all sing.
Y'all getting better.
Yeah. I didn't say that. But century, social stimulus, you can have a moving service, you can have all of this. And the threat is that, that you're going to miss out on the blessings of the Lord. We can say the same thing in church. What's the difference?
It's who you're doing it to.
Who you're doing it to. Who you're doing it to. Is there a clear presentation of service, sacrifice, surrender, faith in Jesus Christ of the Bible? Or is it some nebulous phenomenon? Or is it an image that says, you worship this? This is who you trust now. So, again, the physical act. Why is this so important to think about this? Because if you take that physical mark, whatever that mark is, mark, name, number, you see all three of those listed there. This is why there's no further opportunity for salvation to those who take this mark. It is a physical act of total surrender. This is why in chapter 14 of Revelation, verses 9 through 11, it talks about the wrath of God being poured out on those who receive the mark and worship the beast. And again, in Revelation chapter 20, some of the first participants of the first resurrection are described as having had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. Chapter 20, verse 4. Why? Because of what it meant. The physical act to prove. So, questions, comments, follow-ups to some of this. I know there are. I can feel it.
So you say that mark, the beast is gonna be sown, or the Antichrist or whatever is gonna be sown into himself, and it's about him till he's not gonna allow us to secretly. It's gonna have to be an open
Yes.
testament to the fact that we're following him.
Satan does not want a secret follower. He wants an open follower. You may have this in your mind and accept all this in your mind, but he's not going to be satisfied until you do something that shows you really have followed him.
But you still win, because you still don't go to heaven. If you're worshiping him, you still don't take the mark, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, you'd be lost either way. This guarantees you take the mark, you're lost, and there is no salvation opportunity.
Well, it really comes down to who you follow. There will be no, well, I'll think about it, or you can't ride the fence. This is what it's gonna come down to.
Yeah.
You're gonna make a decision A or you're gonna make a decision B.
Exactly.
Whether you're gonna follow Christ or you're gonna follow the Antichrist. You will be forced to make a decision. As for right now, you can just kind of go out and say, well, this, that, or the other, not really commit either way, but you will have to make
Yeah.
a commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's his objective. He will not be satisfied until everyone gets the mark or pays the price. And as we see in chapter 3, this type of process worked. As soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and men of every language, this is governmental people, they didn't have the whole empire there, but the governmental representatives, men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. The smokescreen of the brilliance, the music, and the threat persuaded this massed group of governmental people. Do we want to call it the swamp? I mean, you know,
So,
of that day, you know, if you want to.
the rapture has happened, and Christians are gone. But during the tribulation, there are those who will be saved. And you're talking about those folks that are saved during the tribulation that have to decide.
In his mind, we're still here.
Well, in my mind, we're gone.
Either way, even if there is a pre-trib rapture, which I don't think there is. If there is a pre-trib rapture,
We think it's,
yeah, if there is a pre-trib rapture, there will still be people saved during the trib. The Jews are testimony that there will, because there will be a great revival, and there will be people saved during the tribulation period. However, it won't be anyone who has taken this mark. You take the mark, you have shut the door. And there are times that people reach a place to where God doesn't call them anymore. You don't want me, I won't call you. You want to go to hell? That's your privilege. Yeah. And for those who take this mark, they close that door. That's why it's important to think, you know, am I going to be deceived into taking it when I want to serve Jesus Christ? No, that combination doesn't work. It will be total allegiance to Him as demonstrated by taking the mark, or you receive the threat. One of the two. And, you know, those who receive that mark shut the door. And God shuts the door.
won't get the mark that won't be saved.
I'm sorry?
There still will be people that won't get the mark.
Oh, yeah.
That won't be saved, because I ain't doing anything that somebody tells me I've got to do, they still aren't saved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen there's some
Yeah.
hard people.
Oh, yes.
We're the stiff neck.
So, and yeah, and they're probably all Baptists, but all of this will still be in play. Even if someone, for whatever hard-headed reason, and I used to work around people like this, and they say, I ain't doing it simply because you told me I had to do it. This right here, it's gonna be hard to get by. There will probably be some kind of underground. That may be, I can't prove this at all, but that may be one way that believers are going to be able to exist. We can't buy, we can't sell. But there will be people who say, huh?
But you can grow and swallow.
You can grow and swallow, yeah. So that may be one way.
No, really, the possibility of getting chipped without being forced to get chipped would be another way to track people from being able to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's another thought.
Yeah, all this is tracking, and, you know, we're tracked anyway. If we knew, if we knew all that the government knows about us, we'd probably be surprised, because we probably don't even know it about ourselves, all that they know. But it would be just another way. Once again, if you have if you have control of the economy so that with a push of a button or a phone call, you can shut down life as you know it. And we've seen an example of that over the last year. How many of you would have thought the world would have been shut down in 2 months? Over a cold. I mean, that's just an example of how quickly and totally things can change. So when there's greater influence, there's greater security in governmental powers to be able to do this.
So they really hit you heavy on the threat.
Yeah.
Until the CDC came out last Sunday night and changed their numbers from 153,000 to 9,300.
Yeah.
It was a real threat.
Mhm.
People were scared to death. They wouldn't leave their home.
Yeah.
But then they showed how many people died from the flu last year, and then same date in the year, but it was 4,000 more last year than this year. Why should there even be mask mandates?
Yeah. Yeah. But threat. You scare people enough, you can get them to believe and accept anything.
Well, at that time, if you've got kids and they're threatening the parents and they can take them off, the kids, the parents gonna say, well, you taking it too, so it's gonna, them's the ones that I'm thinking that if they got the mark because they're parents, they can still be saved.
And it doesn't say in the scriptures about that, whether that's going to be something that Satan is going to want children to actually step up and say, I want that. You take Hitler's youth, pre-World War II. Children 5, 6, 7 years old were so indoctrinated that there is an account of in one family that the parents were, I don't know what they had said, they were correcting him over something, and the kid pulled a knife on him. A 7-year-old pulled his knife and said, I follow the Fuhrer. So,
ISIS is that way.
yeah, so there's an indoctrination that comes with this, so that even very young children, anyone that is able to understand, which goes back to Christianity, if you're able to understand and you refuse Jesus Christ, you're lost, just as lost as, And I think that same process, I can't prove it, it's not stated, but it would make sense that Satan wants somebody who can knowledgeably step up, indoctrinate them so that by the time they're 5 years old that they'll do this. That's entirely possible. So, and even for that type of person, they do this, they're lost. That's the power of it. That's the seriousness of what is going to be forced upon the world. And because of all this, not much less this, but because of all this, the world's going to say, yeah. You look at social media now, how they can cancel somebody out over something totally false. And they just go nuts over it. Imagine when you have Satan on earth running the show. I mean, that's the power of it. And it will work, Verse 7, all these people, Revelation 13, the whole world followed him, except for those who didn't. And in verses 8 through 12, we have a couple here who didn't. Verse 8, at this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced, heard that word recently? Denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, blah, 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 and whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who paid no attention to you, O king, neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So there were some. Nebuchadnezzar really wasn't expecting this. And it's interesting that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not immediately identified as having not bowed. They were reported. So possibly they had positioned themselves to be under the radar, so to speak, and not to seem to be directly challenging the king. However, they were ratted out.
They were set up.
They were set up. We've heard that recently, haven't we? They were set up. I didn't say who said it. I'm just saying we've heard it. They were ratted out, possibly by some jealous pagan idolaters. Now, here's a question. Why didn't they sit up front?
They get slapped in the king's face.
Yeah, why didn't they get a front row seat in order to still be standing when everybody else sat? I heard several of you say something, and it was probably true. What was it?
That'd be like slapping the king's face. They probably didn't mind the king, but they're not gonna worship his God.
Exactly the point.
And they weren't doing it out of pride, they were doing it out of their own belief.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we're being.
They weren't making a political statement. It wasn't about the politics of empire.
I'm sure there were plenty of other people all around the king that unless they were specifically invited to stand there, they weren't gonna get there. You had all these other folks, hey, we won't be around the king, we won't be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We were all saying astrologers won't dead anyway.
Yeah. The astrologers, these were Chaldeans. They were native-born people anyway. They wanted that nearness, social stimulus. They wanted to be seen as part of the elite, part of the power group, of course. And these three, they knew where earthly power resided. They were part of chapter 2, They knew what Daniel had been able to accomplish. And they understood that the king's kingdom was temporary at best. They knew what the dream was about. He's the head of gold. There's another one coming after you, Nebuchadnezzar. So you're temporary at best. And they weren't trying to be rebellious to ordained authority. In other words, Babylon. It was interesting that their aim wasn't the defeat of the empire, but the testimony of God. And they weren't trying to hide, but they were not trying to be overly antagonistic, as Brad said, overly antagonistic to the king. This wasn't about government. This wasn't about the system. This wasn't about the empire. It was a spiritual battle here. And it wasn't confrontation they sought, it was faithfulness before God. And I think this is a good example for us today in this world. That as believers, we don't have to seek confrontation with evil to be a witness. Sometimes we think we have to really make a scene in order to be a true witness for Jesus Christ. These guys didn't try to make a scene. It wasn't about making a scene. It wasn't about making a political statement. They didn't bow, but neither did they try to make a show of their refusal.
Yeah, like, I can't remember who sings this song. He says, talks about his trust in the Lord, you can move mountains, you can move this, you can take this hurt away, and even if you don't, my trust is still in you. So, we haven't reached that point where we're gonna be thrown in the fire yet, but every day, we have those kinds of situations where we maybe question the Lord or question what's going on.
Mhm.
And we have to decide to, I'm gonna trust you anyway.
Yeah. It was interesting, you probably all heard the report of, I think it was in DC, people were eating outside and they were confronted by a bunch of demonstrators who wanted them to do some kind of physical act. Raise their fist or something like that, and they didn't do it, they wouldn't do it. Now they were in a line with them, as some of the reports said, but they were not going to just raise that fist just because they said so. And it was interesting that one of these, I don't know who it was or which one of the people it was said to, but one of the questions was, "Are you a Christian?" I mean, that was a pretty good testimony coming up right there, you know. Satan defeated himself at that point because these people were thinking, well, if you don't stand up to us, if you stand up to us, it must be because you have a greater faith. You know, that's the testimony that should come out of that. You don't have to make a show. And at the same time, even if you don't make a show, you're still going to be misunderstood and attacked for it. They would support the king. We'll see that. But it was only Yahweh. It was only God that they were bowing to, not to the idol, not to the king. And we have to be, careful in thinking about, what is it that we're witnessing to when we make our stands? It's easy in our world today to get social issues, political issues, and Christianity all mixed up. And, to say, well, because of this, I am standing for the other. We need to be careful of that. Because as I've said, a number of times, both parties work for the same devil. Some work for him in one way, some work for him in another way. Are there good people in both parties? I'm sure there are. However, both parties work for the same devil. And we just have to be careful that when we make our stand, we're making our stand and we're clarifying, is it for Jesus, or is it over a social issue, or is it political? Don't try to blend the three together unless you really are able to blend the three together. I'm just saying we just need to be careful of that. Sometimes they do blend. But we just have to be real careful that, we're standing up for this person running for office because they believe in the same things I believe. Well, maybe they do. Maybe they believe in some of the things you believe, but they're probably also believing in things that you don't believe. So, once again, we have to be careful. We have to be wise. That's all I'm saying. I'm not telling you how to do stuff. I'm just saying we need to be wise in what we do. And, we really won't have to seek confrontation because there's, someone is always going to provide the confrontation for us. These astrologers, Chaldeans, came forward and denounced the Jews. And as a believer, you really don't have to do anything outrageous. Just standing against the push of sin is enough to cause people to go nuts over you.
Just standing for the national anthem will cause people to go nuts.
Yeah? Now, does that mean that you're a Christian if you stand for the national anthem? No. Once again, that's where I'm talking,
Yeah.
We love America. We're going to stand for the national anthem. We believe for it. That's fine. But don't say, because I'm a Christian, I'm standing for the national anthem. We're beginning to, yeah. So all of a sudden you say, okay, then America, for all the problems that we do have, you're saying as a Christian, you believe those things are okay. Well, no. There's a lot of things that have to change. So that's why I say we just have to be careful in how we present our testimony. Now, following up on this, and I know I'm really going into detail with some of this, but I think this chapter, this book, is just as relevant today and will be even more relevant as we go into the tribulation period, waiting for the rapture to take place near the end, as it was in that day. Probably more relevant. Be prepared that when you take your stand as a Christian, the world will twist your actions and your words to imply sinister plans to make your Christianity look as bad as it can look. Look at what they said. There are some Jews whom you have set over look how they're setting the king up here, over the affairs of Babylon, who pay no attention to you. Now, when you're king, you might put up a lot of things, but for people to not pay any attention to you for a king is not good. It's not good for you if the king thinks you don't pay attention to him. They were twisting what these three Jews did. Jesus was accused of subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be a king. Luke chapter 23, verse 3. You see all the triggers that were being pulled, buttons being pushed on the Romans? He calls himself a king. This was used against the apostles. Paul and Silas were attacked at Thessalonica. These men have caused trouble all over the world. They are defying Caesar's decree, saying there is another king, one called Jesus. Acts chapter 17, verse 6. Twisting. The early church was attacked for cannibalism based upon the Lord's Supper. Eat my flesh, drink my blood. They accused the church of cannibalism. Twisted. Triggers, buttons today, haters, bigots, racists, phobes of all kinds, and danger to society, danger to health for people who stand, not trying to tear down the whole world, simply standing for Christian principles based upon our relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what we're being called. We're being attacked for that. Be prepared when you take your stand. Whenever it is, however it is, it will be twisted. And these astrologers, I ain't going to be able to get much further. These astrologers knew just the button to push for Nebuchadnezzar. Passage verse 13 says he was furious with rage. In other words, he got so mad, you could see it in his face. His face just changed. And he summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Now listen to this. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Have you ever been around someone who was just on the verge of losing it, and they were trying to maintain their control? They put on the front. You know how ominous that feels? When you just push them a little bit, they're going to lose it. That's what Nebuchadnezzar was here. And that list of phrases, is it true? Now, fall down and worship. Very good. But if you don't, what God is going to rescue me? Oh, yeah, yeah. You can't fix stupid. You can make him a king of an empire, but you can't fix stupid. And we have stupid broke out all over this third chapter here. And notice, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't asking an explanation. He gave him one of two options.
Well, he already knew, it says right there, he knows they have another God.
Yeah.
He already knew Daniel. So that's,
Yeah. But he's gonna try to ride over that God. And he's gonna give him one of two options, bow or burn. We're gonna look at the response of these three next week. Good discussion. Thank you.